John Gibson from the Bowling Green State University Falcon Radio Network joins us now. And, John, we just heard from Scott Loeffler from a couple of days ago. But let's go back to what he said after that loss to Ohio. Very impassioned speech from Scott Loeffler about how he's not giving up on this team. He's not giving up on this program. He's going to get this program back to where it needs to be atop the MAC. And to you, it sounded like your former coach.
Yeah, it was very Urban Meyer-esque. I've heard that speech before. When I heard him say that, I was like, oh, okay, we're channeling our inner Urban at this point. And that's really where it is. I think what he said, and I think the portions of it specifically, was that unburning, that undying determination to get Bowling Green back to where it wants to be. In the early days of Urban Meyer, that was one of his things. We're going to get this program back to where it wants to be, where it wants to be, where the program wants to be. But I think also that is it's a threat. It's a threat to those people that are not helping the program get in that direction. That's kind of like a warning to them to let them know that they won't be around. And I think that's the part that kind of gets left. He's one, Urban was, and I think Coach Loeffler is, we're either going to change the person or we're going to change the person. And that's kind of the way that it is. You are either going to fit in here or you're not going to be here. And that's, the determination that I heard, that resolve after that resounding whooping that they took. That was very Urban. I've heard that speech, plenty of times during my, that 9 months with Urban, to 9 months a year with Urban.
And Scott Loeffler was at Florida with Urban Meyer, so certainly some of that has rubbed off on the Bowling Green head coach. And a season like this can wear you down. You could hear it in his voice that he's frustrated, but the resolve is still there, which after a season like this, you got to have that resolve moving forward.
Well, I think you have to look at what it is that you have. When you look at what you have on paper and you realize you're doing the best that you can, and it's frustrating for a guy that's as competitive as Scott Loeffler and the rest of that staff. It's frustrating for them to not be able to actually step out and do everything that they want to do in order to win. You heard Coach a couple of weeks ago talk about, when against the Western Michigan game, when he said, I'm coaching for the team that I want to be, not for the team that I actually have. That's frustrating because you know what you want to do, and you may even think you have some guys that are capable of doing what you want to do. The problem is that they are not there yet. And that's the problem. So, yeah, there's all kinds of frustration. I think that you see as a coach, you understand, not only am I playing against Ohio, but I'm recruiting against Ohio, too. To give up 66 points to Ohio on national television, every one of your recruits that is choosing between Bowling Green and Ohio saw that game and is going to make a decision based on that game, along with the relationships of your coaches and the visits that they'll be taking next week. And so this is a very, very prime time for recruiting, and this is how we're going to get Bowling Green football back on track.
Final game of the season for the Falcons comes Friday afternoon at Buffalo. This is a Bulls team which looked pretty good beating Toledo last week. We saw what Jared Patterson was able to do. He's the reigning MAC East Player of the Week because of what he did against the Rockets. Can the Falcons slow down Patterson in that rushing attack?
Probably not. Just being honest, probably not. I think that this team is going to be – they're going to give their best effort. But I think this team is 12 weeks beaten down. I think that this team is 12 weeks tired. And I think that, they'll be able to do like they've done for the past few weeks. They'll compete for a quarter or two. And I think eventually the depth of the other teams, or the lack of depth that we have, is going to start to show in, small gains turning into larger gains, turning into chunk plays, turning into touchdowns. Especially now that we've seen also 2 weeks in a row, there's some teams that have taken to the air on us and really started to air out some of that coverage, some of the young defensive backs that we have. Mistakes that we didn't see in week 7 and 8, we're now seeing in week 10, 11, and 12. Those are things that, those things aren't going to fix themselves. I think these guys are going to go out and give a valiant effort. If you are a junior, sophomore, or freshman on this team, then this is a dress rehearsal for you. This is going to determine your pecking order when that depth chart comes out in spring ball. This is definitely, the coaching staff is going to be looking to see who gave up and who didn't, and they will be treated accordingly. But at the end of the day, do I think Bowling Green stops Buffalo? I don't think so. Not in a Week 12 game the day after Thanksgiving. I don't think it happens. I think that, again, they give a valiant effort. I think, Konowalski, Nico Lawton, and those guys are going to go out there and do the best they can, but I don't necessarily see it happening.
Bowling Green comes into the game with a 3-win season. But regardless of what happens against Buffalo, they will never be able to take away the fact that Bowling Green beat Toledo this year.
Without a doubt. You never want to be in a situation where one game makes your whole season. You don't want to do that. But that is going to be the one thing that we're able to hang our hat on in this season. If we are honest about where Bowling Green is football-wise right now, we understand that this is not going to be a quick turnaround. If you were around for the Dave Clawson years, if you were around for that 2009 season when we went to the bowl game, you remember the 2010 season. That's where we are right now, rock bottom. 2010 season, the 11 season. Then all of a sudden things start to look up for the 12 season, and then boom, bowl game again, bowl game MAC championship. That's where we're still 2-3 years away from being able to say we are competing in the MAC. But I think that this coaching staff not only has the ability to recruit the players, but they also have the ability to develop the players that are going to be necessary to get us back to a point where we're consistently competing in the MAC. Then the question becomes, how do you keep Scott Loeffler, or who do you bring in to replace Scott Loeffler after the program has reached prominence again?
Well, and I think that's one of the interesting things that came out of last week with the Frank Solich situation, that Ohio lucked into that situation, getting Frank Solich and not being able to keep Frank Solich for 13, 14 years. Whether or not Bowling Green can do that with Scott Loeffler, I think is an interesting topic of conversation.
No, they can't. I mean, just period, point blank. Scott Loeffler has goals, and you can't hate Scott Loeffler for that. Much like, when Urban left, people were upset. I totally understood. He had goals. He had things he wanted to accomplish, and we see he's gone on to be one of the greatest college football coaches there are. Scott Loeffler wants to follow that career arc. That's what Scott Loeffler wants to do. He's still a relatively young guy, and I think that eventually he will get there to where he's one of the better coaches in football. I think with Frank Solich, he's a guy that had already been to the mountaintop. He'd been to Nebraska. You can't get a bigger football program than Nebraska. That's one of the blue bloods. And in that situation, he still wanted to coach. He still had this itch. He still had the skill. But more importantly, he still has the know-how. And so he's been able to take a 13, 14-year run at Ohio, and he's been able to turn that into almost a second career, where in the state of Ohio, he will be known more for what he did with the Bobcats than what he did with Nebraska. And that's a big thing. And so that's kind of my thought. How long is it going to take before we start seeing more of that in the MAC, where there's these coaches that have been to the mountaintop, maybe they're in their late 50s, maybe they're a young 60, and
and Akron tried to do that with Terry Bowden, and it just didn't work out.
Well, I think Terry Bowden had been out of the game too long.
Yeah.
I think Terry Bowden had been out of the game too long. I think you have to have a guy that's coming right out of it. Almost like what we've seen with North Carolina and Mack Brown. Mm-hmm. North Carolina, we know Mack Brown and North Carolina have history, and they go back, but I do think that's going to be a MAC thing. If you want to have longevity at coaching, at your coaching staff, and I think that's a very big thing, you have to get somebody that I believe has been at the mountaintop, and understands the difference between Nebraska and Ohio, and respects the differences. The Nebraska media is a lot different than the Ohio media. The pressure at Nebraska is a lot different than the pressure at Ohio. A 6-win season, 7-win season at Ohio, people are still like, okay, well, you got to get to 8 or 9 next year. At Nebraska, they're like, fire him. Yeah. And, if you still want to coach, you still have that passion, the MAC offers that. The MAC offers that in abundance without the intense media scrutiny of being at a blue blood program. So I think that there is a blueprint there with Frank Solich in Ohio. I don't necessarily think that you will always catch that, though, because I don't think you're always going to catch coaches that are willing to say, hey, I just want to coach this so much anymore. You get guys that now, what's Urban, 50, 55? Mm-hmm. And he's like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Now, do we believe him? Yeah. But, they say, I don't want to do this anymore. It's a stressful thing. Like, the 38-year-old Urban Meyer that I met and the 55-year-old Urban Meyer I was hanging out with over the summer, those guys they're the same. They're the same guy, but you can tell there's a little less hair at the top. It's a lot more gray.
They age like presidents of the United States.
Yeah, they do. They age because there's so much that you have to worry about. You've literally got 105 guys you got to worry about, but then you've got sponsors and you've got boosters and you've got everybody that you've got to try to make happy. That's difficult. And so you get how many of those guys that get to 55 and get fired from a bigger program and then say, hey, I want to go to the Midwest and actually still coach football. Yeah, when I got enough money to retire, they're going to be hard to come by.
Well, you see New Mexico's parting ways with Bob Davie. As we head into the silly season for the MAC, is there going to be a lot of coaching turnover in the MAC? Certainly there's been rumblings that Solich is going to retire at Ohio. Doesn't look like it's going to happen quite yet, but certainly with his age, that's always a topic of discussion. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of coaching change in the MAC this year.
I don't think you will. I don't think you will. I think you see a program like Akron, who has changed, who is on a first-year coach. You see Kent, who is, there, Sean Lewis has been there 2 years. I don't think Buffalo was just I think he's a second or third year guy. You're not going to see a whole bunch of changes this year, and I don't necessarily think that you should. I think that the MAC is better when they do have tenured coaches. When you've got tenured coaches, let's be real. Schools like Ball State, who are perpetually looking for a new coach, they had a great season this year. Same thing with Eastern Michigan. If Eastern Michigan fires their coach, they need to drop the football program, because this is one of the best Eastern Michigan football seasons that we've seen in years. So with that being said, I don't expect a lot of turnover in the MAC, but I do expect a lot of competition on the recruiting grounds, and I expect to see a lot of guys. I expect to see some more rivalries form. You start to see some guys that generally don't like each other and can really get out there and get after it and create some excitement in the MAC. The MAC is one of those leagues that ebbs and flows. And, there are those years where, a MAC team would sneak into the top 15 and, we're talking about a New Year's Six Bowl. And then there's those years where the MAC looks like the worst conference in Division I football. And that is the beauty and the ugly of Mid-American Conference football. There's a lot of great players that come out of here, but there's years when things are down. And I think, honestly, this is not one of the better years for the Mid-American Conference.
All right, thank you very much, John Gibson.